Good afternoon, or good evening, of course, or could even be good night, wherever you are listening in the world. This is Culture Matters. My name is Chris Smith, and welcome to Culture Matters on International Business, where we talk about topics that pertain to culture and cultural differences. This is my location, and that location is Paris, and the other person on the other side is, hello, Peter.
It's Peter. My name is Peter van der Lende. I am in Atlanta, USA. Today we're going to talk once again about signs you're not getting it. That was what we did last time, 9 signs you're not getting it. Of course, we're talking about cultural differences. And since there was quite a reaction to our episode on 9 signs, we decided to pick 9 more signs that you're not getting it, correct?
Yes, indeed. So that is an article and a podcast and a webinar that you can find on culturematters.com. The first 9 signs that you're not getting it. Let's hit this off and start with number 1, please.
And number 1 is something that you and I like to talk about because we have seen this happening in front of our very eyes, because there are companies who say, if you have differences in culture, we may recognize some of that, but we can get over it by just giving everybody something to read, a book. We can give you a book on, for example, the Dutch. So if you're an American and you're going to live in the Netherlands or you're doing business with the Dutch, we can give you a book that we both know. It's called The Undutchables. It is actually written by a Brit and an American. And of course, they had insight in the Netherlands because they lived there. But what happened was, in this specific example that you actually lived through, and I have another example, is that the Americans in this particular case didn't have exposure to the Dutch. They were just given the book, read the book, and then went to the Netherlands, and it was basically a confirmation of all these stereotypes, right? So you have the Dutch, they are very blunt, they are very direct. You have the red light district, they're very liberal. All sorts of windmills and clocks and what have you. So it was more of a confirmation of all these stereotypes. So the Americans were like, yeah, we read in the book that it was all funny and sometimes maybe even crazy. Now we know for sure, as opposed to helping cultures getting over or getting people over that obstacle. And the same thing, I started working with the French, and there's a book. It's called 60 Million Frenchmen Cannot Be Wrong. This is, of course, the American stereotype, like, everything in France is not really working or is very bureaucratic, but they're very successful. And also that book talks about stereotypes, but it actually does a pretty good job also putting things in historical perspective. I will end just this section, Chris, by saying I do think that books matter. So books matter, culture matters, if you are giving the right book. I mean, there are many books that talk about cultural differences. You can even find them on culturematters.com, but also books that are talking about the differences between people and putting it in a larger perspective. And I always mention these books of Thinking Fast and Slow and The Wisest One in the Room, etc. Those are not books that talk about stereotypical things or emphasize stereotypes. So that's the number 1 sign. If a company says, here's just a book and read through it, that's one. But there are more. So the number 2, Chris, is people are talking about money or their budgets, right?
Yeah, of course, it's always about the money, right? It's too expensive. Number 2 is the title of number 2 is it's too expensive, and of course, everything is it costs money, and there's nothing like a free lunch. Even the sun, sometimes you have to pay for this thing to come up, or to actually see it. And so we also don't work for free, right? But not paying attention to cultural management, or to cultural competence in this case, is also very expensive. I'll give you some examples here. These are examples that I bumped into personally in the 20 plus years that I've been doing this. Banks outsourcing their IT to India and not getting back what they want, right? So they outsource their IT in phases, yes, indeed, in phases, to a country like India, because everybody speaks English and everybody is an ITer in India, which is now the case. And they get what they ask for, but they don't get what they want, and then they're confused, which is time and money wasted. Turkish IT staff, and I've seen them personally, that don't consult their boss for further clarification of what they need to do. It results in projects running over time because they don't get enough steering which they needed. Again, time and money wasted. US expats, and this is particular for for American expats, that can't settle in their new country. Usually it's the partner, the non-working partner, that determines whether the working partner will stay or not stay, because they simply don't understand. They can't root in their new country. It doesn't always happen, but it's an expensive affair. And Southern Europeans ended up in a deep depression due to culture shock, people not understanding the fact that they come in a different country, and that that different country is, well, that country is different, and hence their experience will be different, and they've got no association to hang this with, to associate this with. So it's all time and money wasted. So I've had this experience not so long ago when the Mars Bar company came to me and asked, could you write a proposal for some cultural intervention, because we're having trouble there. And I came back with my normal fee. And indeed, they came back with the answer: it's too expensive. But what they don't keep into account is the time and money it costs by not paying attention to it. Move on to number 3, Peter.
Yeah, number 3 is something that we've seen in the past a lot as well, is language, of course, the impact of language. And companies might say, we have some issues with different offices across the globe, and we believe that we may need to do something when it comes to differences and cultural differences. But the problem is language. And if English is not widely spoken, or any lingua franca, and for the most part, of course, in business in the world, it's English, the company might say or use the excuse, it is not worthwhile for now, because the English of our employees across the world is not good enough for us to teach them or to make them more cultural competent, because they wouldn't understand. So we may need to improve the English, or we don't do it at all, etc. Of course, you can ask yourself the question, if you're an international company, should you not have people who at least speak the lingua franca, the common used language, good enough to understand a potential culture competence course? But that's another matter. But what we always say is, don't underestimate what people actually understand. If a person speaks somewhat English, but it doesn't sound fluent to you, that doesn't mean that that person doesn't understand it. Sure. And it is worthwhile just to get over it and use all the tools you have to make people cultural competent, even though it sounds like maybe to you that it's not very fluent. And there's one example that I want to share here as well, which is an articles that I read sometimes, scientific articles that prove that, in fact, it can be hugely underestimated what people understand. And the one article is called Piensa Twice. It's like think twice, and it's of course Spanish, English. And this article shows that if a person is actually does manage a second language, but is not very fluent, that person might understand certain issues even better, or can analyze it better, or is a better decision maker than the person who processes it in their own language. And the reason is that the emotion gets filtered out. So for example, if I tell you, Chris, that you are a rude person, or because you're Dutch, you might feel offense. But if I say it in a language that you barely understand, the emotion gets out and you just analyze what's being said. So don't underestimate people who speak a second language and might not be that fluent, or appear not to be that fluent.
Good point. Number 4, showing of the 9 signs that you're still not getting it, and that it is culture indeed. Number 4 is, we've always done it this way, so why change? Indeed, well, change is hard. Change is indeed hard. And what tends to happen a lot is when organizations venture out into different cultures in different countries, in this case, what they do is they take the blueprint of how they're doing it back home in their original country, and they take that blueprint and they put that blueprint directly onto the other country. And there are so many examples where these mergers and acquisitions simply go wrong because people don't adapt or adjust to the different cultures. So for instance, you can do a project, if you're used to doing project management the French way, and you export that idea to, say, the Netherlands or to Iceland, or whatever corner of the world you want to go, then whatever works in France will not necessarily, usually not actually, work in the other country. So that was number 4 in terms of we've always done it this way. So why change? What's number 5, Peter?
Yeah, we've done it always this way is of course a classic, not only in terms of culture and all of that, but it's kind of like change in general, right? We've always done it this way. The next one is, and this is one of my favorites, and I've seen it many times. For example, there was once an American director who told me that when she was or he was, I forgot, visiting the Netherlands, that after a meeting, they were talking inappropriately. So it was very direct. So they found it rude. It was also inappropriate. While the Dutchman with the beer in his hand after the meeting was just reflecting on what happened in the meeting in terms that the American didn't understand. And the reaction was, well, John or Jan, let's say, is a very rude person, and I'm offended. And I told that person in the American person saying, you know, in general, the Dutch talk like that. The Dutch tend to be very direct. We've talked about this many, many times. It may come across as offensive to you, but it's not this guy. It's just after the meeting, we tend to analyze it and make jokes about it, even sometimes inappropriate for other cultures. So it's not a personal thing, it's a cultural thing. If you can put this back into where it belongs, which is culture, then that person would not have been offended and could have had the opportunity to just get over it, right? So personal, it's not always personal. Sometimes it's just culture. What is the next one, Chris?
Business is business in any country. If you believe that, you'll believe anything. So, of course, fundamentally, business is business in any country, and most of the businesses are there to run to earn money. But if you look at a company like Greenpeace, they're not necessarily out there to earn money, but they have objectives. Okay, fair enough. So here is an example that I found quite interesting. And again, we're going back to the Netherlands, of course, are both our home countries. And this is the example. If you give someone or the person that you're doing business with in the Netherlands, before your negotiations, a bottle of wine. So you have this meeting and you go there and you say to this person, here's a bottle of wine. And the Dutchman with whom you're doing business could consider this as bribery, and which actually could bring your negotiation and your business to a bad end. However, in neighboring Belgium, south of the Netherlands, and France and Spain and Italy and possibly many other countries, bringing a bottle of wine before negotiations is actually a sign of respect, and that could actually smoothen, not only because of the alcohol, but could smoothen the negotiation process, because indeed it is seen as a sign of respect. So business is not business in any country. Number 7, Peter, for you.
Business is business in the sense that business, yes, of course, companies have a bottom line, right? But it's how to get to that bottom line. It's the how, right? That's how where culture comes in. The next one is it's not a priority, and this is many times it's actually understandable. It's not difficult to see why a company might say that. And what I just told you an hour ago or so, Chris, is like it's like a little bit of a sidestep, but it tells a similar story. As I still do business in the airport and airline space, where one particular airport currently post-COVID, we're now in August 2022, is facing a situation where there's no staff available, staffing issues, and there are passengers standing in line for like 2, 3, 4 hours to get through the airport process. Mm-hmm. And I called one of these guys and I said, you know that self-service is a solution for this, right? If you don't have staff, you put self-service, a self-service process in.
You check in yourself and you label your own luggage, right?
Yeah, you label your own luggage, you can drop off your own bag, you don't need necessarily to see a person. You can use biometrics to get through immigration, you can use biometrics to get on board, and all of that stuff is all doable. It has been done already across the world. And this person was saying, yes, exactly, you're right. It is a top priority, but we have other priorities now, more important priorities. So even in a crisis situation, there are other priorities. Now, understandably, of course, he has other priorities because he needs to resolve this problem, and to implement something like this takes time. And the same thing happens with culture. We have issues with our foreign offices. We have issues with our foreign suppliers. We don't understand them, but we have a shortage of suppliers now, so we need to get through this. But at the end of the day, it is always underestimated that the problems you might have to begin with is because you don't understand them and they don't understand you, which is a cultural problem. So it might be wise to make some of that stuff a priority. The next one, Chris, is what? Oh, that's a nice one.
Basically, setting your priorities is a good priority.
Yes.
That could also be one. Okay, number 8 and number 9, cultural differences will be a thing of the past soon. Well, it could be. It hasn't happened so far. At least I think. And the example here, what I want to use, and what most people tend to think actually, because of internet, because of globalization, because we can order everything online that we want, that those cultural differences will be a thing of the past in, say, 50 years' time. Well, for those of you who are living in the Eurozone, where we use the euro, so primarily Europe, this new currency was introduced in 1999, right? And the question here, the very simple question here is how much did Europe change after the introduction of the euro in 1999? Right? Okay, we had Brexit. That was the logical thing to do because of the British. They have always looked west, and never towards Europe. They think Europe is the continent, and they're not really part of Europe. So that European integration, if you look at the troubles that the European Commission in Brussels has, time and again, to come to one line, you know, what the current tumult, the current polarization going on in the world, not only in Europe but also in the United States and in other countries. The fact that so many countries are fiddling with their constitution to either stay in power longer or to push things through, which actually should not belong in the constitution, but should be general legal stuff for the courts, right? And also we are traveling more and more. That's what a lot of people think. But if you are part of that lucky ones, the lucky few that travel, of course, there are millions of people that do travel. But all in all, it's only 5 or 10% of the world population that is as privileged or fortunate to be able to travel. And I don't think the cultural difference will be a thing of the past soon, which is good for us, of course. So we'll stay in business. I'll do number 9 as well, Peter, if you're okay with that. Doing business simply requires honesty. That's something that a lot of people agree with, but the point that they're missing is that the word honesty is culturally loaded. In other words, the word honesty is not culturally neutral. In other words, what's honest in one country is not honest in another country. And the example that came here was actually was given to me when I was doing a workshop. We were talking about Nike, the sports apparel company. They have, being an American company, they have a so-called no gift policy. So in other words, you're not allowed to receive gifts and you're not allowed to give gifts. That's the no gift policy. Then there was this guy from Turkey in my physical class, the class that I was doing at that moment. And he looked at me and he laughed at me and he said, well, this is nonsense. If I don't give gifts, if I don't take gifts, then nothing would come off the conveyor belt here. And actually he put it like this: I use this gift giving, and for me that's not honest. It is to grease the wheels of business, and I really like the word that always stuck with me. So that was number 9 in terms of.
I just wanted to add, Chris, the thing that we said like in just an hour ago as well is like the perception of honesty as well between the English and the Dutch, and there's this famous 10-point joke about what the English says and what the Dutchman hears and things like that, right? And so we were saying like the Dutchman might say something to the Englishman which is very direct, like this meeting was not good, or he may even use a profanity to say like this meeting was S, right? And the Englishman might find that offensive. But at the same time, the Englishman might say, that is very interesting. Let's see what we can do. Meaning the Englishman saying, I'm not interested in what you have to say. And for the Dutchman, then after the fact, when nothing happens, might find it dishonest, right? So the perception of honesty, as you said, is culturally loaded. So that might even be the case between almost, let's say, almost neighbors, like the English and the Dutch.
Indeed. All right, well, we've given you another menu of nine more things you're not getting here. It's culture stupid. Just pay attention to cultural differences. Not only because we get paid well, but simply because it's an important aspect in business. All right, that's it for this one. And I guess with the next topic, we will keep you posted if you're on the mailing list. All right. Thanks for listening.
And we're going to the Q&A now, correct?
Yes, we're doing a Q&A. All right. Put your questions into the comments field, please.